Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to this edition of the Beyond Africa podcast with me, Ngalim Bernard, your host. With me, we have Dr. Gabila Nubong and Professor Benaki. We're going to review the stakes in Cameroon surrounding the elections and especially the decision of the Constitutional Council to reject Professor Maurice Kamto's petition. If you remember, or as you remember, ELECAM rejected his application and the Constitutional Council validated ELECAM's rejection. But the professor actually thinks his candidature was solid and built in the law and needed to have been approved. So in this conversation, we are sharing our ideas on what we think and the way forward, the next steps, what the elections are going to look like without Professor Maurice Kamto, the stakes, what other political opponents show, what we think is going to be the future, and if that future is going to be a long one or a short one, and how that is going to play into the current crisis that is already existing in the former Southern Cameroons, the Anglophone regions. So let me welcome Professor Benaki to the Beyond Africa podcast. I've read a lot of your outings in the recent past, especially on the Horizon newspaper. One of the last issues you spoke about was a possible triangulation between Bello Buba, Issa Chiruma, and Professor Maurice Kamto. We'll talk about that later in the program. All right. When he comes back, we'll continue from there. So, Professor Akih, what are your first impressions about the decision by the Constitutional Council today?
Well, the decision today confirms what has already been suspected, that the government has decided to avoid competition and they were going to look for whatever means that could be done and carry it out. It was neither a legal process nor just one. It strikes me just as the hopeless situation in which we are in Cameroon today. People have to put into perspective what has been happening since 2012. So Mr. Kamto was in Mr. Biya's government briefly, and he explains his entrance into government as mostly tied to the Bakassi case with Nigeria. So he had to have the similar statute as the main interlocutor on the Nigerian side who was representing Nigeria. So that's how he became a minister, and he resigned afterwards. But he resigned, and then there was an electoral code in April 2012, which was passed. But then in August, MRC or CRM was formed, and Kamto was the leader. Immediately, the CPDM went about modifying the electoral code. The electoral code in April did not require any political party to have elected officials before putting forward a candidate. That condition was put in December 2012. It was put in because Kamto became the leader of a new party, which proved to be a potential challenge for the government. Nonetheless, they were able to get some elected officials in the 2013 election, and therefore he stood for the 2018 election without any problem. But by then, nobody knew exactly how strong each of the opposition candidates were, because we had OC with the SDF, which had been the leading party at that time. And then you had Cabral Libi, who was rising, and Maurice Kamto was a formidable contender, but nobody could see from the very beginning. Towards the end of the campaign, it was obvious that he was the leading figure of the opposition. So after the 2018 election, which many people believe that it was very, very close between Kamto and Biya, either one of them could have won. If we ignore what the official results are, because the official results were not even confirmed at the Constitutional Council. The fraud was neither confirmed nor denied. So he has gone through a lot, and we should also bear in mind that this year there was supposed to be parliamentary and municipal election in February, and they were postponed with the sole purpose of making it impossible for Mr. Kamto to be a candidate. Yet he played them and came up with a party which was formidable, didn't ask him for money, and so they couldn't use bribery and corruption to get rid of him. The only thing they could do is to bring a former member and a former executive and manipulate the official documents to reflect that Yebga is the leader of the party. So when you see all of that, the government is very afraid. is very afraid of coming into competition with Mr. Kamto. There is no doubt today if there is an election and there is Kamto on the ballot and Bia is there, Kamto will win by far. Opinion polls we have conducted on our platform shows that he's at about 60% or 60% of the support, and Bia hovers around 10%. So you can see if you are the CPDM and if you're Paul Bia, you are definitely frightened having somebody like that in the ballot.
Thank you very much, Prof. But let's look at the case in court today. The case focused on Manidem's candidature, the dual investiture by Manidem. Do you think the Constitutional Council did not look into the law, did not look into the facts as they are, and they just rendered a pre-made or a pre-prepared decision to eliminate Professor Kamto?
It's a political decision handed down from the administration. It has nothing to do with law. It has nothing to do with the electoral law. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. First of all, there is no article of the Electoral Code that requires ELECAM and the Constitutional Council to eliminate a candidate if there are two candidates from that party. There is nothing like that. All you need is to verify that the person who has signed the papers of the candidate is indeed the leader. And up to June, ELECAM was corresponding with Mr. Ekane as the leader of Manidem, and the Ministry of Territorial Administration has been paying the subvention for political parties for Manidem through Mr. Ekane. There is nothing there to say has to do with law. But even if you took that into account, you would have to reckon with the fact that Mr. Yebga is not a member of Manidem at this moment, and therefore he could not have presented a candidature which is endorsed by him alone, and he is not a member of the party. Whereas Mr. Onana Tellier, the CPDM member, who is an elected official, a member of the CPDM challenging Mr. Paul Bia, his case has been thrown out. So there is nothing there of consistency, and there is nothing there of legal nature. It's purely a political problem. It's a political decision, and it's in alignment with exactly what the government wants to see.
Thank you. We'll get into some elements of what you have just mentioned. Let's welcome Dr. Gabila Nubong onto the program. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us. You've been having some technical issues. Looks like everything is settled.
Yes, thanks so much for having me, and good evening to you, to Prof. Akih, and to the rest of your viewers and your audience. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So you're joining us at a time we're talking about what we understand from the decision by the Constitutional Council today to eliminate Professor Maurice Kamto's candidature. What do you make of it?
It's a sad day for Cameroon's democracy. The true essence of democracy is free and fair political participation and contestation, where citizens can be afforded the opportunity to choose the best candidate based upon their assessment of his ability to move them forward. And I think that for Cameroon's political process, being deprived of Professor Maurice Kamto's participation in these upcoming elections is depriving Cameroonians and Cameroon's democracy of a true, real potential player that could have contributed to the robustness of the game. So it's a sad day for democracy. It's unfortunate that there could be hands and players behind the scene that manipulate such outcomes, but the people must remain resilient and continue to engage in challenging the system, I think.
Thank you very much. Professor Akih, were you surprised with the outcome of this decision?
Well, I would say I'm only surprised by how bold and arrogant the people are. But if you read the pattern, then everything will be clear that this particular government in Yaoundé does not want to face competition. And since Mr. Kamto appeared on the scene, he has been rising. His popularity as the main opposition figure has been rising, and I would say it's almost at its apex right now. And therefore, he constitutes a significant challenge to the government. And if you look at Mr. Paul Bia, there are people who voted for him in 2018 who are not comfortable with voting for a 92-year-old who is considered not to be actively involved in the affairs of the state anymore. So you have opposite the main challenger, Mr. Kamto, is almost at the summit of his popularity as opposition figure, and Mr. Biya is at the CPDM, the ruling CPDM, is at their worst. So they definitely were looking for ways to block him from participating, starting from the way the electoral code was modified in December when the party was formed in August 2012. So nonetheless, he was a candidate in 2018, but it was not very obvious that he was the strongest among the opposition candidates who were there. But right now, that fact is very clear, and the CPDM cannot risk a direct confrontation at the polls because the gap is so big that even if one decides to rig, almost all the voters will know exactly who the winner of that election is. So the most comfortable thing for them to prevent that embarrassment was to try to disqualify Mr. Kamto. The fact that they have successfully done so is a final demonstration that there is no independent electoral commission, there is no independent judiciary in Cameroon. Everything is coordinated and centralized and directed by the CPDM government.
Professor Nubong, Professor Akih has just made a point here saying the CPDM did not want to go head on head with Professor Kamto at these elections because he was going to win. Do you share that view?
Yeah, I think it's an easy way out for them. They did not want to risk the popularity of going against the prominent, arguably most prominent opposition figure at the moment, which is sort of sad because it takes away the joy of contestation and competition in the political process that makes for the vibrancy of our democracy. Why they opted for the choice of disqualifying their potential competitor instead of competing and beating him in the field, I think it's down outright cowardice. And a demonstration of the lack of the confidence of what they have to put on the table. Because if they were confident that they enjoyed the majority support of Cameroonians, they would be willing with their chosen candidate to take anybody on that presents themselves as a contestant. If they were confident that their offering, their candidate was the best. But unfortunately, we are dealing with a situation where we have a 92-year-old president that wants to run for election, who does not have the présence d'esprit to come out and say that I am running for elections, and does not have the présence d'esprit to go out and drop his own files by himself, or to engage the people whose votes he's seeking, to say that I'm the one that is trying to get elected. You know, he does everything by proxy and tells Cameroonians that you should trust me because I'm the person that is going to take you into your future. It's sad, I think so.
What I'm hearing from the two of you is that Cameroonians don't trust the elections process and the electoral management bodies, that is ELECAM and the Constitutional Council, because they appear to be parties to the whole proceeding. Meanwhile, democracy expects them to be neutral arbiters in the process. Is that a fair assessment of what you both are telling me, Professor Akih?
Yes, they are partial. They are not the impartial judges that should be under this condition. They are coordinating with the CPDM, and there have been instances where voter registration is carried out in the residences of members of the ruling party. So they coordinate almost all of these activities. So that is very discouraging because by now we should have about 13 to 14 million registered voters. We have been struggling to get even to 8 million. And this 8 million we're only able to get because somebody like Mr. Kamto came out and said it's possible for us to obtain change in this country through the ballot box, through election. And so people were energized. And many of those people who registered, they registered hoping to have the opportunity to cast a vote for Mr. Kamto.
Professor Maurice Kamto, who is the victim of this decision, has been a permanent client to this court or to this council since 2018. And did he expect to have anything different? If you both say that the Constitutional Council and ELECAM are partial and players in the electoral process, Professor Nubong.
Well, I think Professor Maurice Kamto has always opted for the path that says he wants to test the institutions and be perceived to be law-abiding in all his engagement. For some reason, he seems to be extremely sensitive to the accusations or the notion of being misrepresented as not being a law-abiding citizen. He's a different kind of politician, I must admit, one that goes the extra mile at every juncture to demonstrate that he wants to play by the rules and he wants to follow the letter of the law, and consistently seeking to engage the owners or the holders of the institutions or the managers of the institutions to be custodians.
These institutions are not neutral. What gives them the courage to be this bullish, this arrogant, this condescending in front of 20 million Cameroonians, some of whom have put their hopes in Professor Maurice Kamto, and at a time when everyone is expecting some change in Cameroon?
Well, my view on this is a bit controversial. I've written a bit on this. I've written on the political situation in Cameroon, about 3 books on this. The second one was Cameroon after Paul Biya, and the third one is towards a new federal constitution with the people of Cameroon. So my theory there is that all political systems have a religious foundation, and this religious foundation informed the way that the institutions work. And I think there's some scholarship that supports the fact that modern constitutional democracy, with its perspective of egalitarian rule according to law, has a Protestant background. But on the other hand, you have a patrimonial state where the head of state is everything. All institutions are directly subordinate to that head of state. One can say that patrimonial system of government is inspired to some degree by the vision of the system of government of the Catholic Church, where the Pope is above and the Pope is infallible and everything is subordinate and power flows from the top to the bottom. But to be fair to the Catholic Church, there is the Holy Bible by which the ordinary Christian can judge even the Pope. But in the patrimonial system, there is no standard. The standard then becomes the whims and the caprices of the person who is above there. So what I call the Franco-Catholic system, what has happened in Cameroon today is not different from what would happen in Rwanda, what will happen in Congo, what will happen in Ivory Coast, or what will happen in Senegal. It just happens that the people of Senegal are more organized and they are able to come out in their masses and vote out president, voting new ones consistently.
So if I'm hearing you well, the problem is the organization, the people, how the people organize. It's not necessarily how the government or how the political parties organize themselves.
I'm saying that the political structure, the institutions, they have a philosophy. And that philosophy is such that their power flows directly from the top. And so it's organized to function as a one-party system. And competition can only be granted by that one party. And there is no reason to believe why one party will grant competition to unseat itself. So that's the first problem. But the way you fight that is the people have to be aware of that philosophical underpinning and organize themselves to fight it. And that's what has happened in Senegal. To be fair to Senegal, the first president, Senghor, at least he was able to allow Abdoulaye Wade to have a party. And that political party existed for a very long time. Even if he were not winning the election, he was there presenting himself as a contestant in these elections. But in the history of Cameroon, Mr. Ahidjo became president of the independent Cameroon without an election. It was organized such that he avoids an election. And after he avoided that first election, he consolidated power and organized a crowning election in 1965 and had 100%, 1970, 100%, 1975, 100%, and so on. So that structure, even though multipartyism came in 1992, it was the most competitive election. And after that, the system has reverted to a one-party philosophy where in the constitution, they even talk of the president as the guarantor of the judicial system. So the court cannot judge the president because the president is supposed to be the final authority. And there are cases where the highest authority in the court tells you that we are incompetent to render just judgment on this particular case. In a way, they're saying that we have not received instructions from above to judge one way or the other.
Thank you very much. Dr. Nubong, I want us to draw parallels between Fru Ndi and Kamto because this election had some vibe that could only be compared to the vibes of the 1992 presidential elections. Paul Biya was declared a winner of the elections after the elections, and Fru Ndi challenged that, took to the streets and ghost towns and every other thing that followed. Now, Professor Kamto, who is having that almost the same energy, has been disqualified from competing. Is there any parallel that you can draw between the two in looking towards the future?
I think the similarity between the two candidates is the fact that, like Fru Ndi in his days, Kamto seems to be the clearly forerunner opposition figure at the moment in terms of the Cameroon political landscape that is leading from the front. And I think since 2018, his ability to mobilize his supporters has...
We're losing you again.
I think for the time being, he saw a fuse across the various regions of the country, as Fru Ndi did. Fru Ndi enjoyed support in Bamenda, in Bafoussam, in Douala, in Yaoundé, up across the various parts of the country. And Professor Maurice Kamto's party, yes, does have support across the regions, but not the degree or level of popularity that I think, or general support that I think Fru Ndi enjoyed in the 90s. I also think, secondly, and this may be a little bit controversial, I am of the view that the crop of people and the season of the political history of the country at the time where Fru Ndi engaged or challenged the government, the appetite for change and the resolve to pay a price for change seem to have been slightly higher then than it is now, and for a number of reasons, because the regime, the regime was at its first of being tried and tested. And they have since then perfected their act of muzzling and muscling the political process to get specific outcomes. I would have wished to see a certain set of testing his street credentials, which is something that Fru Ndi did successfully. Because when Fru Ndi called for ghost towns, it was respected across the board, across the nation, from Bamenda through Bafoussam, through to the West Province, to the Southwest, to the littoral, to Yaoundé. And I think that went a long way to earn the respect of the regime for Fru Ndi and for him not to be taken for granted. I mean, there are things that have been done to Professor Maurice Kamto that could never have in our dreams happened to Fru Ndi, like the 8 months that he spent in jail. I cannot remember Fru Ndi spending 2-3 days in the cell in Cameroon at any point in his political career. That was just the kind of leader that he was. And he earned that on the streets. Not in the courts. And listen, maybe Fru Ndi was a bookseller and Maurice Kamto is a professor of law and he believes in the law. But I still firmly believe that Professor Kamto has, for the last couple of years, demonstrated his republicanness and his resolve to abide by the laws. The regime is waiting for his street credit. The regime is waiting for his ability to be able to mobilize the people of the road on the streets. The regime is waiting for him to be able to prove that he has that kind of popular level support that he presupposes or that he suggests that he has. And I think, like Prof. Akih has said, then he becomes a real contestant to be negotiated with. If the regime knew that if we arrest Kamto, Cameroon is going to burn, they will not touch him. But when they realize that we can lock him up and keep him in jail for 8 months, and everything will go on as normal, it reduces him down to the average Joe out on the streets. And that was not Fru Ndi. Fru Ndi was not the kind of politician that you could lock up, especially not in Bamenda. Bamenda would burn if you put whichever jail you put the Fru Ndi in Bamenda, people will come and remove him physically with their hands. That was a kind of relationship he commanded from the crowd. That does Kamto have those kind of supporters? I think he does. But for some reason, I think that he is the one that is sort of holding them back, which in terms of his street credit and his ability to be able to challenge this regime, I think is going to play against him. If I was an advisor to Kamto, I would say let loose the beast. Set the streets on ablaze, not literal fire, but test your street credentials. Call for ghost towns. I mean, listen, look at the Amazonian movement. Your Tapang Ivors and your Mark Barrettas of the world call for ghost towns and they are respected. And these are just university graduates that are political activists. They are not national level political actors and figures with a support base like Kamto. What stops Kamto from taking his protestation to the people to say that you are all witnesses of the fact that I have been duly, legitimately prevented from participating in a process that's a democratic process, be the judge. If you are tired of the fact that you have been treated poorly for the last 42 years, stay at home. If you are discontented with the fact that they are about to present a 92-year-old president as presidential candidate, demonstrate your disbelief. I don't think I should be the one giving Kamto the reasons to go Cameroonians to protest or to stay at home. But he doesn't just seem to be that kind of political leader, and I guess we have to live with that.
So Kamto appears not to be that kind of political leader who can take the moment to move the political discourse from the courts to the streets like Fru Ndi, as you say. But Professor Akih, we are in a situation where the other opposition leaders have already accepted the decision. Some of them recognize that Kamto was illegally, illegitimately, and unlawfully taken off the ballot, but they have already moved on and they are calling for Professor Kamto to come support them. My question is, if they recognize that Professor Kamto is illegitimately removed from the list or illegally removed from the ballot, how would they trust that the same organizations or institutions that took him off the ballot would respect the outcome of the ballot if these opposition leaders actually win?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Before I come to that, I want to touch on something Professor Nubong brought up, I think, from a previous conversation that we had with him. That is the issue about protest and why Mr. Kamto has not used that to his advantage. I make the distinction that there are protests and there is insurrection. It is in the interest of those in government to call every protest an insurrection. But those who protest must recognize that protests are constitutionally guaranteed means of political expression because sovereignty belongs to the people. If you believe in popular sovereignty, and these people exercise their sovereignty by electing somebody, trusting that they will do something, when these people begin to do things that are at variance with what they promised, the people who have the ultimate sovereignty have to come out and express themselves.
But the people have given the sovereignty, have delegated their sovereignty to these people through the Constitution. Why not use institutions created by the Constitution to hold these people responsible for not complying with their campaign promises?
I try to make the distinction that the people can never delegate their sovereignty. They always retain their sovereignty. They only delegate an aspect of sovereignty. For example, when they elect a president, they don't expect that president to act as a police officer or as a magistrate, right? Because when the magistrate is pronouncing justice, is justice in the name of the people. But the president doesn't have that power. That means that there is no one person in a republic who has the sovereignty that the people have. The people have the ultimate sovereignty. They delegate aspects of it and they can make a distinction between the office and the person holding the office. And if their behavior is at variance with the requirements of the office, they can ask for that person to be removed without attacking the office itself. They are attacking the office holder as being unworthy of that office. And that distinction needs to be made. And I make the observation that Mr. Kamto, having served in the government of Mr. Biya, is still transitioning between that interpretation of every action on the street as insurrection to interpreting it as a legitimate political means of expression. Because once you understand that, it's very important. When you listen to the government, people like Mr. Atanganji, they tell you politics is in the ballot box, not on the street. That's a lie. For example, the United States, the civil rights movement, that was political expression on the street. The streets are part of politics. And so until you move Cameroonians or move Kamto, who has the power, to that understanding that you can bring out people and tell them politics is the ballot box, is the street and everything. If you don't like the way the ballot is conducted, if you don't like the way they are restricting your choices on the ballot, you can go to the street and express that. It's part of the constitutional process.
Professor Akih, are you in any way telling Professor Kamto to organize protests in order to overcome the decision of the Constitutional Council? Because my understanding is the decision of the Constitutional Council is final.
No, the decision is final. Right now, the decision is final. But if you have 3% of Cameroonians protesting that this election shouldn't hold. There will be a negotiation.
So the best way to look for a negotiation is to protest? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying right now. I'll come to tell you why it would be ineffective now. But in general principle, if you had 3% of people negotiating, the date of the election will be rescheduled. The process may start again over. That's possible. That's the balance of political power expressed that way. But right now, Mr. Kamto has the misfortune. I think Professor Nubong has just compared him to Fru Ndi and said he is popular nationwide, but not as much as Fru Ndi was. But also we have to note that Paul Biya is much, much weaker now than he was in 1992. The only problem is that there are other political actors who have introduced themselves into the game as a potential substitution for Kamto or for Paul Biya. That complicates matters because these people, they cheer on the elimination of Mr. Kamto, even if they don't say it, but internally they see that as an advantage. Kamto then has to wait until it is shown that the government doesn't have a particular problem with Kamto, the individual. The government has a problem with Kamto as the potential challenger who can take their power away. So when that now shifts to a new opposition candidate, and that opposition candidate faces that injustice, then Kamto will have an ally with whom he can actually bring the momentum to the street and then end the system. So if I were to advise, I would say Mr. Kamto should endorse somebody now, maybe a candidate from the north, an Anglophone candidate, on conditions that that person is willing to fight. That person has the courage to stand up against injustice. And from my observation, I see Mr. Chiroma as one of these persons. And he has shown solidarity with Kamto throughout this process. I think he was the only main opposition who was in the hall today out of solidarity with Kamto.
Thank you very much. Professor Nubong, do you see Cameroonians trusting Minister Chiroma as the fighter to support and carry the cause that Kamto may want to fight against injustice?
I sort of second Prof. Akih on that in a very strange way. Mr. Chiroma has, in my sense, surprisingly really reinvented himself. Like a good politician, I don't know what are the dynamics of his power base in the north. I support the thesis of an Anglophone candidate. That could be a consensual candidate from the south, maybe someone like Barrister Akeremuna. Just for the fact that he's proposing to lead a transition that would reestablish the institutions. And I think that if he can get the support from the Southerners and the Northerners, he could be a potential contestant against the regime in unanimity. I also have been warming up to the idea of a Northern candidate. Basically, whoever Kamto backs at this moment is likely to emerge as the forerunner of an opposition coalition. If Kamto can get his Southern allies to agree on a candidate, there seems to be pushing, and maybe Prof. Akih has a better understanding of the dynamics. There seems to be a bigger voice behind Bello Buba as the candidate of the North than Issa Chiroma. I don't know what what are the dynamics of his political mobilization capacity in the North. But it would look like Bello Buba seems to be the preferred Northern candidate from within the North. Before now, he has not been the best of representing much of anything. Given his long history and his engagement with Fru Ndi and over the years and all the different times at which, for example, when the opposition was able to take over parliament in the 1990s, he sold over his votes to the president in exchange for ministerial positions. But we could say that's what under the bridge. There's a lot of beef and bile against Bello Buba for his contribution to the entrenchment of the system and to weakening the opposition at critical moments. Whether that would not play against him if he emerges as a consensual candidate remains to be seen. And if that can be discounted, then I think it would be useful for us to then consider seriously a Chiroma or an Akere candidate with backing from the North. I would not caution or encourage the North and the South to go in on this separately. I think it would be fair to consider an Anglophone candidate with the backing from the North, and I would be happy if there can be a deal that backs a northern candidate that seeks to, or that promises to give serious voice and consideration to the Anglophone issues. And Chiroma has been, of recent, quite vocal and articulate and quite open in meeting with Anglophone leaders. So either of the outcomes, in my sense, would be a suitable way forward to challenge the incumbent in power.
All right. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us now, you are watching the Beyond Africa podcast with me, Ngalim Bernard, and my host, Professor Nubong and Professor Akih. We are discussing the fallout of the Constitutional Council's rejection of Professor Maurice Kamto's candidature for the October elections. Kindly like, subscribe, comment, and share. That is the best way to keep us going. So as we were talking about the trust of the electoral system, the UNDP, that is Bello Buba, has just issued a communique in which it condemns the Constitutional Council's decision. And he says that as a political party that is firmly committed to electoral fairness, the guarantee of fundamental rights, and the free expression of popular sovereignty, the UNDP strongly condemns this unjustified exclusion, which undermines the credibility of the ongoing electoral process. We deplore the fact that the Constitutional Council chose to adhere to a strictly formalistic reading of the text, refusing to examine the substance of the irregularities raised, disregarding documentary evidence, public testimony, and the fundamental right of every citizen to stand as a candidate in an election. So this part of it actually gets me more interested in the reasoning behind Constitutional Council and ELECAM refusing to go into the details of who is actually the legitimate representative of Manidem. Because if that were the case, then anybody can appear at any time with documents claiming to be the legal representative of all the political parties. And if they refuse to go into the inner workings of these parties, they would therefore lack the mandate to have elections running, because all the candidates will be dismissed. So what do you attach to this reasoning by ELECAM that has been confirmed by the Constitutional Council, Professor?
I think we shouldn't really waste time trying to rationalize something that is obviously there. That the main thing is that the ruling party controls the institutions. The ruling party does not want to go up in an election against Kamto. And every other thing there is explaining something that doesn't really need explaining, because ELECAM has been in communication with Mr. Ekane as the leader of Manidem, has been inviting him to meetings right up to June. And the website of the Ministry of Territorial Administration has been showing Ekane as a leader up to the 23rd of July, when they changed the information. And in 2020, the elected official, on the basis of whose position this party is qualified to put forward a candidate, he was endorsed by Mr. Ekane in the same way that Mr. Ekane has endorsed Mr. Kamto's application. But if they were consistent, then there was a second candidate from Univer, which the party fielding Akeremona. There was a second candidate from CPDM, but this did not lead to the elimination of the main candidate put forward by the person with whom ELECAM has been in communication and has documentation. The question is, do we first of all appreciate that the ruling party does not want a competition in which Kamto is a candidate? If we conclude that, then the rest is just a formality. With respect to Mr. Bello Buba's statement, I would say there are three ways a politician could respond to Kamto's injustice. One was genuine outcry against injustice. The second is inward rejoicing, but outward crocodile tears. And then the third was silent. The most deadly political response was the silence. The most authentic would have been the genuine cry against injustice, because it can't be against you tomorrow, it can be against any politician standing up for public office should be a champion against injustice. And then the second one there, which is crocodile tears, I think I would put the response of Mr. Bello Buba in that category, because there was a time when his letter would have had more weight, maybe even to influence the direction of the Constitutional Council. And that's what Mr. Chiroma did. Even if Mr. Chiroma is not genuine, his timing was perfect. He's a politician. You can see that this man is a politician. Politicians change their minds, but they change their mind based on what they understand is the interest of the people. That, at least, I appreciate with a politician.
Thank you so much. Professor Nubong, would a concrete, effective and meaningful reaction to this rejection that the UNDP calls illegal? Would that effective rejection be calling on all the opposition candidates to say, because this is blatantly illegal, blatantly wrong, we are not going in for the elections until justice is done? Because if you can violate one candidate's rights before the elections, nothing guarantees us that you would guarantee or declare our victory after the elections.
I think it's very unlikely that could be the outcome. I think there seems to be more a positioning to lure and charm Kamto and his voters over to their potential candidacy. And that sort of probably explains all the reactions that have been coming from the retained political leaders that are going on in fourth elections. Yes, of course, you cannot discredit the fact that there is also the sense of the outcry against injustice. I think it's a combination of the two. There are people who are reacting to the situation who have no stake and no interest. I'm thinking of people like Metro Alice or non-retained presidential candidates that are actually outraged at the fact that Kamto has been disqualified. And of course, there are others who, in their political calculation, are factoring in the potential and the possibility of luring him into a coalition and getting his voters, which I think politically is also legitimate. Now, would that translate to they not being willing to boycott the process because of Kamto? I think that's highly unlikely. Like Prof. Akih says, I think most of them are sort of seeing this as an opportunity, support, because let's not forget that as much as they are also in the opposition, Kamto was as much a political opponent to them as he is to the regime. So Kamto is not just an opposition to Biya, Kamto is also an opposition to other opposition parties who also believe that they want to have an offering to contest the presidential elections. There's also this underlying current that seems to be preparing a long haul game, preparing for the long haul. There are some of them whose participation they are seeing beyond the presidential. Some of them have come to terms with the fact that they are not going to be able to win Biya. So some of them have come to terms with the fact that they will unlikely emerge as the preferred coalition candidate. And even in which case, if they run on their own, they are unlikely to contest Biya, but they realize that there are municipal and parliamentary elections that are around the corner in a couple of months, even though it goes into another year. So there are some people who are just playing keeps. They are building momentum to move into parliament. They're building momentum to regain space in the political geographical space, who will not yield to a secondary candidate for the optics of it, because they want to be able to conquer territory and retain seats in parliament and in councils and regional legislative elections and all of that. So I don't see this crop of politicians backing down, boycotting the elections for the sake of Kamto. However, in a 5% window, I say 5% window, and this is now my wild chaos theory that says, if Kamto can leverage his street credit to bring the whole process to a space where it is obvious to all contestants that he is the incontournable. So in other words, if instead of going down the road of endorsing another candidate, Kamto goes down the road of the process is going to be the 3% that Prof. Akih talked about, this process is going to be forced to alter its calendar and accommodate me. If he can go down that route and succeed at it, then he becomes the voice that says, either I proceed in these elections or there shall be no elections. And maybe.
What do you think of people who have said this regime is desperate to hang into power, and they know that considering Biya's age and circumstances surrounding people of his age, a regime may be dropping, so they are really not even to organize elections because that is going to facilitate their stay onto power?
I think that they are more anxious to organize elections than not to organize elections. If they do not organize elections, they find themselves sitting with the illegality of an extended mandate, which extended mandate will continue to leave questions around Biya's ability and his viability and his ability to govern. But
I think the idea that they don't want to organize elections is rejecting Kamto's candidature may lead to street protests, which may then give them an opportunity to exercise martial powers or state of emergency and then postpone the elections and postpone it again indefinitely?
I don't see them. Well, I've heard that theory, and personally, I think that it is not in their best interest to opt for that option. I think that within the context of the Perpetuation signature and the de facto presidency of Ngongo behind the high instructions, it is to their interest to perpetuate that model by legitimizing a BR re-election that gives them a possibility to plan a transition within a 7-year mandate. If they postpone the elections based on protests will calm down in a couple of months. And it doesn't solve their fundamental problem of how do they secure the legitimacy to use high instructions to govern the country again for the next 7 years on the one hand, or keep Biya alive as long as they can even keep him on life support to continue to govern the country and manage the transition within a 7-year electoral period. Because mind you, if Biya gets elected in October and gets sworn in and is alive to take the oath of office, he starts a new 7-year mandate. And they can literally, from day 2, keep him on life support and keep him alive and run the country for 7 full years, as they have been doing for the last couple of years, without anybody asking them any questions, because there is no legal constitutional cycle calendar that requires that be challenged. So I personally think that they are pushing more in that direction, to give themselves the liberty to plan the transition. So if the guy goes into a coma, they can put him on life support. There's a case of the Saudi prince that was involved in an accident in 2019, or 2016, that was kept on life support for literally 7 years, for almost 7 to 10 years, who died recently. So with the Ngongos of the world and the Tanganjis of the world, they can keep our man alive for 7 years on life support and govern the country. And I think that they would rather opt for that option than go for chaos and postponement of the elections.
Thank you very much. Professor Akih, I think you wanted to say something in this direction.
Well, I think I agree with most of what Professor Nubong has said about elections. People are more anxious to have elections than not to have elections. On the one hand, I think that if this regime is going to try to rig the election, if Mr. Kamto succeeds with whom he goes into this election, if they succeed to bring out protests that effectively call for the annulment of that particular election because it's irredeemably tarnished, then the clock can be reset and the whole process can start all over, and he becomes a candidate, right? And they can put that demand. As long as the people are out on the street, they can sign up that we are signing up on this. We are going to stop our disruption of the streets and the process, economy, and everything. We're going to do this, provided this election is cancelled, provided there is a new election, and that all politicians who are supported by the people are allowed, specifically Kamto, that he has to be a candidate. That can be obtained from negotiation, not from a court, right? For example. So he can push the system to that direction, that if this election is annulled, and the fact is that it is not inclusive, it doesn't really reflect the will of the people, which is what the election should be trying to descend. You cannot try to descend the will of the people by restricting what choice they can have. So that's one possibility that Mr. Kamto still has, to go towards bringing in more opposition and then turning the system, because it's predictable that these people are going to try to rig the election. Catch them red-handed and then ignite protest, as long as these protests are calling for a constitutional process to follow and say this election needs to be annulled. So that's one way looking at this particular scenario that is ahead of us. The other thought I had was basically, yes, to look at the political forces that you have in Cameroon right now. They're asking themselves, what does it benefit not going to the election? Maybe I would become a minister if I support the government to the end. Some of these candidates are considered to be close to the government. And then that factor will be there as well. But don't also forget that the regime itself is looking at ways of perpetuating the political system in which Cameroon is embedded. This is what I call Franco-Catholic system. It works best when it is a quasi one-party system, so that it doesn't have to change hands with another party. And some people have thrown out the theory that there's going to be a constitutional amendment, which is going to introduce the position of the vice president and then say that that vice president takes over from the president in case the president is incapacitated, is sick, or resigns or passes away. And then he will serve out the term. If that becomes the issue, then he will find a vice president and put in there and then pretty much leave office. And that vice president will have a couple of years to consolidate institutions before the first time that person is presented to the people of Cameroon. And then the institutions will be under the control of that person as well. So that could also be an option that they are considering as a way of maintaining the system that is in place. It's in the interest of the opposition to be aware of that and to come up with robust ways of going up against it.
All right. So when I listen to you both, I hear that the problem is just not having any person succeed at this material time because the current regime wants to perpetuate itself.
That's correct. I think that's the proper assessment to this. And Mr. Kamto needs, I think this takes Mr. Kamto out of the picture a bit to reveal that it is not about Kamto personally. It's only about Kamto because Kamto is a real challenger. The government knows that. If you don't know who the leader of the opposition is, you should go and look at what makes the government tremble. And it's Mr. Kamto. So if he's out of the picture, the next person who will make the government tremble will be the person who enjoys the support of Mr. Kamto. And I think that it is going to be even stronger if that person is a northern candidate who has served in the government of Mr. Biya, knows a few things or two about how he's perpetuated himself in power, but this time around is backed by somebody who is very powerful. The question is whether Mr. Kamto can convince his supporters to come on board. And that's where some of the dynamics, some of the negotiations may come into play. For example, people have been throwing around, you should have a truncated government based on reforms, and after that, you resign, you call an election and all of that. Kamto may become interested in that, which I don't really see as a clean way of doing business. I think that whoever is going to be elected, if it is a transparent election, that person is elected for a 7-year term to carry out reforms, and these reforms will be introduced within these 7 years with the ultimate introduction of the way the president should be elected, and then the term of office that will change in 2032.
I'm eager to ask you this question. Maybe you answer it very briefly. You sound like the very institutions that illegally took Kamto's name off would actually recognize the victory of another person that Kamto supports at the end of the day. Do you see that as a possibility?
It's political power. If he has the people on the street, he has the polling station results, and the results from ELECAM are different, right? They have the power. They can say, you either recount or you cancel. The question is, do you have 1%, 2%, 3% Cameroonians on the street? If you have that, I can guarantee you that only the right winner of the election will become president, or there will be another election.
I like the idea of having the right winner or having another election just to respect the laws, transparency, democracy, and have another person actually win the elections based on the results of the ballot box. And Dr. G, I just want to hear from you. Do you think that is feasible, especially looking at it within the international framework at this point? Before I started receiving candidatures, the United States Embassy issued a statement calling for fairness and transparency. I think that is the only foreign mission that issued a statement. How do you see that playing in the international scene? Because all of us on this panel, we agree that Kamto was illegally taken off the ballot. And that is the impression we have flowing along social media. We read that. Now, how do you see the international community playing in here?
Well, the international community is not going to do what Cameroonians are not prepared to do. The international community typically steps in to accompany a domestic process that has already all the points of pressure on the regime. And the international community tends to come in as a mediator to say that, listen, chief, the options and cut your losses. And then they tend to sort of often provide came in and they told Aijo, listen, you have a house in Côte d'Azur, in France, in Monaco, retirement and have a peaceful. They have attempted to speak to Biya a number of times to tell him and provide him options of a peaceful exit. But for fear or at the risk of being perceived as interfering in domestic affairs, they would never take an overt, outright, strong, directive position. It's often a function of what are the dynamics that are playing on the ground. Now, this system, make no mistake, is resistant, is resilient. It should not be underestimated. But I believe Prof. Akih has been arguing that if we continue to put pressure to mount on the system, it will crack. It would crack at some point because it's not founded on justice. Even the people who are the players driving this normal at the point do not fundamentally believe in it. You can sometimes see the predisposition or the behavior or the body language of people like the Minister Rene Sadi to realize that there are some people who are part of the system who do not necessarily really agree with what is playing out. It's clear that there are a few stakeholders that have hijacked the process and they are driving it in a particular direction. Point of note, Mr. Tangaji and Mr. Ngongo are actively driving this process at this point in time. But it's incumbent upon all the stakeholders, especially the frontline leaders and political leaders, to continue to challenge the status quo. Because the system, power does not give up. Power does not give in unless it is challenged. And for these people, it's about their survival. And they are not mass boys. They are ruthless conservers of power. And whatever weakness that is demonstrated in the opposition or by the population in allowing them to allow themselves to be manhandled, they will go right that. By the way, guess what? For the last couple of weeks, we have been focusing on the conversation about the Kamto candidacy. And nobody's really talking about the 92-year-old candidate that's running for the CPDM. Have you seen how they have nicely put that conversation out of the way? So at the back of our minds, our subconscious is actually sort of settled with the fact that the CPDM is presenting our 92-year-old president to run again. That is the outcry from the rest of the international community. That's what the world is shocked and surprised about. Cameroonians seem to have made peace with that. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's outraged about it. They have locked us down in this Kamto debate, and it has been all about Kamto till now. We are saying let's turn around and contest the elections. And I believe that all pressure is relevant. And like Prof. Akih is saying, if we can get the maximum number of people to participate in the process and defend the process, the system is resilient, but it is not impermeable. It can crack under pressure. And I feel that maximum pressure needs to be borne to bear. And if the domestic mobilization rises to increase that pressure, it will become a lot easier for the diaspora and for the rest of the people out of the country to back up that pressure and to mobilize the intervention of the international community. If Cameroonians do not rise up to take back their country from this group of people that have held and are holding the institutions captive, there's pretty much nothing that the international community will do. The international community is prepared to do business with whoever holds power and can demonstrate that it's secure. And if that is the people, they will do business with the people. If it's a handful of people who have captured the institutions and are signing all the contracts, they will do business with them because that is just how the international community functions. It works along the lines of interest. They're not altruistic. They're not trying to fix Cameroon. They're trying to do business with whoever can secure business for them. So it is up to us to, as a people, to be able to say that, no, these institutions, like I like what Prof. Akih said earlier on, the people are sovereign and they retain the sovereignty to define the direction and trajectory of the institutions. If the people decide that there should be a rerun of the presidential elections, the people's sovereignty has thus decided. And if it needs to take street power and street protest and mobilization to compel the institutions to come back to an election that is free and fair and organized, where all the contestants have the possibility of freely participating, so be it. But my 100 million question is, are the people up to the task at this point in time? And is Professor Maurice Kamto that rallying point around which that is going to happen? I don't know what I feel about it, but I'm with bated breath to see what's going to be. If he is the guy that is going to stay legal and going to keep arguing in court, then it's fine. Let's just wait for Bia to die and have this conversation again. But if causes to take their course, he actually flexes the muscles that we all see he has, then this could lead to something. Because when the system is under pressure and the streets are busy, who knows? You unlock other sources of influence that may have been having ideas of their own that says now is our time to. So I think it has to be all systems go, all hands on deck. pressure from every direction where pressure can be placed so that this system will crack, because it's not serving us. As a collective people, we are all in agreement with the fact that we are not happy with what they are delivering. So the question is, what will be the best and most efficient way of getting them out of space and installing a system that is meritocratic and is robust and is democratic, that gives outcomes? Because, by the way, Ben, at the end of the day, the fundamental frustration with this system, in addition to its undemocratic nature, is that in terms of economic performance, in terms of its ability to lift up the people and contribute to prosperity, it is not underperforming. It is not performing at all. To say it's underperforming is I don't know, it's overstatement.
Yeah, and that is what Cameroonians have been talking about. And I think that is why the conversation was moved away from a sheet of Paul Biya's 42 years in power and placed on Maurice Kamto, making him a villain instead of the victim in the whole scenario, which means there is supposed to be some movement around. And when we see the being blamed for the actions of the oppressor, it becomes more troubling, because the people who are suffering together with the victim tend to blame the victim for their suffering. Meanwhile, they have an opportunity.
We used to be having a conversation, like you say, about the 42 years record of President Biya in power and why he should not be running for another elections. But the people in the regime have turned around and made this about Maurice Kamto, and we are all busy with the conversation.
And that is the power of the media, because controlled would definitely follow that, and it creates the buzz. And on controlled media, the podcast world follows the buzz line. So that is what is supposed to happen. But ladies and gentlemen, we promise you, going forward, we're going to have these same conversations every Sunday, and we're going to be talking about the most important aspects of the elections, which are going to be the economy, trade, foreign policy, the Anglophone crisis, things that really matter, and what the various candidates are proposing as solutions. And these candidates would also include the current president, what he's done. We are going to review his own approach from history and project into the future. We are almost rounding up. I would like to give you both 1.5 minutes to say your last word before we sign off. Bernard.
Yes, for the discussion, I just want to say what we experience in Cameroon is not new. In 1950s, that was the same thing that was done to UPC. They pushed them, first of all, with electoral fraud, and then they tried to make the party, and at one point they took to underground. It is possible for us to have change now if we understand the power of the street. So far, the idea is to make Kamto the villain instead of the victim. And now they're going to try to shift the conversation to a unified opposition front or unified opposition coalition. They will distract people like that. And when they don't realize it, they say, okay, because you have, then Biya will now win. So I am trying to push people away from that. My narrative is that Mr. Kamto is the leader of the opposition. He can win with one or two other people adding onto him. That's why he's not on the ballot. And whoever he supports, that person becomes, they become the coalition. If you really want to help the people, join them. If you want to help Biya, stay where you are or join Biya openly. But don't tell us that Biya wins because there was no unified opposition front. I don't believe in that because he can never succeed. I believe that Kamto is the leader, and we watch where he is going from here.
Thank you very much, Professor Ben Akih. Professor Nubong, your last words.
Well, I think that institutions in become stronger and more robust. We are tested. In the case of Cameroon, I think we are taking a long walk to the establishment of democratic institutions. And I think that active citizenry and increased participation would make for the strength and the robustness of our future institutions. The current institutions are extremely resilient. They are not supposed to be underestimated. It's sad that they have Machiavellian tendencies and genius. I wish that they had used their creativity in order to push us forward in terms of the establishment of vibrant democracy that can bring prosperity to all Cameroonians, but they are instead involved in power conservation strategies. But I also fundamentally believe that the way you break such a system is by continuously testing it and testing it to its limit. And I believe that testing it comes with the pressure of political participation, and that continuously testing the system to its limit is going to cause it to crack. and that's going to bring about the change that we all desire. As far as the current elections is concerned, I believe that we are informed and inspired by recent occurrences in countries like Senegal to say, let us try the route of a united opposition behind a unified candidate. I support Professor Aki's view that the person that Kamto carefully selects sort of has an earth raised, and it will be in the interest of the rest of the 13 other candidates sort of rally behind, give that push towards a unified front for the. I also support the view that this should sort of probably be narrowed down to the possibility of an Anglophone candidate or a Northern candidate. Of course, as an Anglophone, my preference would be for an Anglophone candidate or a Northern candidate, because I do read that it is the electoral base of the North as currently configured that typically gives victory to the who wins the elections. And so if it would require us supporting a Northern candidate to dislodge Bia, on condition and provided that our issues will be catered for, I would say let's support that. Otherwise, I would go all outright to say the North has been in power, the South, Center, South, and has been in power. For all the reasons advanced, Cameroon would benefit from an Anglophone president at this point. I am one of the advocates of that because I just think that we do have a higher sense of duty when it comes to the management of the affairs of the state, dispassionate and independent for personal, private. The place where the country is, we could benefit from such a leadership, and my personal preference is for this regard. But other than that, all change is good change at this point in time. After 42 years of being the breath of fresh air, whoever that is, even Ben, if you become the president, I think it's going to be a good transition for all of us. But thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much from your God's ears. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching us. Thank you and see you next time.